Hello everyone, welcome to our third episode of Pointers with the Pros, where we sit down with professionals from the surface preparation industry. My name is Jeff Jenkins.
And I'm Kaylin Starr, and boy do we have a treat for you guys. So today we are sitting down with Michael Ritz, who's over in Alaska, and he has been in the surface prep industry for over 30 years, mostly restoring very large fishing vessels and barges in Alaska.
That's right, Mike started out working in huge shipyards, doing jobs for the Coast Guard. He restored the Washington State ferries, and he just went on to continue to work on some other huge large-scale projects. Now Mike and his wife have branched out and started their own business based in Alaska named Alaska Marine Coating.
So with Mike having so much experience in the surface preparation industry and even so much experience with traditional sandblasting before he started his own company, we really wanted to sit down and ask him, what was it that made him transition into getting a dustless blaster as opposed to dry blasting. And so I will let him tell you about the first time that he needed a wet blaster. And so he contacted someone from our staff and purchased his first dustless blaster to blast a commercial fishing boat. So I'll let him tell you about that project.
So we were doing a small commercial fishing boat, and it was in 2013, 2014, and the owner didn't want to haul the vessel out. We live kind of like in a touristy type, community. And so he wanted to do it in the water. It was a halibut black cod longliner. And so normally they have an enclosed deck where they haul the gear and so forth. And he wanted to take all that paint off, but he didn't want to take the boat out of the water. Just to haul that boat, you could be talking anywhere from $10,000 to $25,000.
Wow.
Just for the pick, right? So if we could do it in the water. So the guy's a good friend of mine, and he said, what would you suggest? I go, well, the only way we're going to do it in the harbor is, with wet media. So I started researching, and I knew that your competitor, I don't want to get myself in trouble, I'm too small to get sued. I went online and saw the Dustless Blaster, and then even back in 2013, 2014, you guys have a lot of good videos. I looked at that, then I called one of your representatives, and we got that first. I think it was the DB 500, and we did the job, and we took it down. It was an SP6 blast, right? Yeah, a commercial blast, and it was amazing. We took off 40 mils of coating off of this deck. And I think we used 1 2-ton super sack of sand. That's incredible, to take that type of coating off.
Now, just to clarify, Mike was blasting the inside of the ship while it was on the water. For those of you that don't know, traditional sandblasting creates a huge plume of dust. So the reason why he did switch to dustless is because it allows him to control that plume of dust, as well as improve the impact that the media has on the surface.
He got this machine in 2013. That was his first job, and he has not used dry media since.
That's right, in 2019, he blasted over 35 vessels in 6 months. That's so much work, so quick, that's crazy. But there is one other thing that I know surprised Caitlin and a little bit me too. He actually had to fly his blast pod, or the Dustless Blaster, on a plane in order to get to those vessels to blast. That's just something incredibly unique. So let's go ahead and hear what he has to say about that particular experience and how well the Dustless Blaster has worked for his business.
Like the thing with that DB 500 was a lot of the remote locations that I'd fly to were only accessible that time of year by plane. Everything was frozen up. There's no road system. We flew it on an airplane.
Oh my gosh.
So we did a barge, a tug, and a commercial fishing boat in Dutch Harbor, Alaska 3 years ago. Everything that we brought to do the job was flown on a plane.
Oh my gosh, that is absolutely insane.
And it didn't make sense to get one of those sweet pre-setups with a compressor that you guys sell when you're flying stuff around. That's a little expensive.
Right.
I've got 6 blasters. I have not used dry media since I bought my first Dustless Blaster back in 2014.
Wow.
I flat out do not use it. I've done $3-4 million contracts for Crowley and Foss and all these big tug and barge companies. In 2019, we did 35 vessels in 9 different locations in 3 different states in 6 months.
Oh, that's great. So for you, what was it like? What is it about the Dustless for you personally that has just worked so well that you'll never go back to dry?
It's so up in Prudhoe Bay, and a lot of people, when you watch the news about drilling and so forth, that is the cleanest, most regulated piece of real estate on the North American continent. It is absolutely immaculate. So we did several barges up there. You fly in X amount of media, to do the job, but every bit of that media has to be picked up, bagged up, and transported back south. You can't even get rid of spent sandblast media on the slope. So you're talking, you could be shipping 13 to 20 tons of wasted media back where you got to get it tested. Then you have to pay to get it disposed of, legally and responsibly. A Dustless Blaster cut our media use down by 80%.
Wow.
That's huge because you're paying for it twice. You're paying to ship it twice. Up here in, Wild West Alaska, that can be a lot of money, a second, coming from, an ACE SSPC background, and having been around blasting both new construction and repair, painted almost every one of the Washington State ferries down in Puget Sound. I never realized, if you'd have talked to me before Dustless Blasting about using, back in the day it was slurry blasting and wet media, I'd be like, no way, dryer's better. When your media is absorbed in water, you're getting a lot more velocity and impact out of your media by it being wetted down than you are with dry air. Another thing that we do, like a lot of guys when they start blasting, especially with dry media, a lot of people assume that more sand equates to a more efficient blast. That's complete and utter nonsense. And when I use dry media, my boss, we like to hear that sand pot whistling, because you were getting such a clean mixture. And it's the same thing with the Dustless Blaster. We don't dial that sand way up because what happens, more sand takes away your PSIs at the nozzle, right? You're not getting the horsepower out of your air, and it's a bigger mess to clean up.
So for those of you who don't own a Dustless blasting machine and don't really understand what Mike is talking about when it comes to limiting the amount of abrasive he's using, he's talking about dialing in that abrasive consumption, which ultimately means you're controlling how much abrasive is coming from the blast pot and out to the hose and out of the nozzle, essentially.
Yeah, the reason why this is so important, because if you allow too much media in the hose, it hinders your performance and slows the media down as well as lowers the pressure at the nozzle. This ultimately means you'll be using more media and your project will be slowed way down.
Okay, I would like to just circle back a little bit because I'm not ready to move on from the whole airplane bit. Originally, he had a DB500, but now he also owns an 800. And when he told me that he had to put his blast pot on an airplane, I almost legitimately fell out of my chair. I have never heard of anyone having to do something like that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and for Mike, that's just another day on the job. That's a normal thing for him.
And so for those of you who don't know, like Jeff and I, we're in South Texas. We do not experience freezing conditions very often. Some of the things that Mike is mentioning, I've never had to deal with in my entire life, to be honest. So it's important for you guys to understand that he is dealing with a lot of challenges that some of or most of our blasters don't really hear about very often. And so, like, for example, another challenge Mike mentioned to me was the lack of resources in Alaska.
He doesn't have a Home Depot every 5 miles down the road. So when something happens, he needs to get it fixed on the job right then and there. So having equipment that's easy to maintain and easy to fix is really important to him.
Exactly. And so, Mike isn't able to get parts shipped to him like that. If he's in a remote location and he's out on a job and something happens to his machine, he needs to be able to make adjustments very quickly. So I will let Mike talk about his experience with making these adjustments on a Dustless Blaster.
We were the first company to do a 200 by 65 foot barge on the Arctic slope up in Prudhoe Bay. And being mobile, we played with your competitors' machines, but up in your rural Native Alaskan villages, you have no resources. You don't have a PPG or a Sherwin-Williams store on every street corner. In some ways, it's like going to a third world country. So, we've taken a Graco Eco-Quip up there, which is a pretty technical machine. And if you have breakdowns or any type of failures, you're screwed up there. Mm-hmm. Especially when you're dealing with oil and gas and you've got liquidated damages and penalties. And, the Dustless Blasting machine is, it's easily repaired in a pinch. And I've been in times, and, I order parts from you guys and so forth, but I've been in times in remote villages, native villages in Alaska, where we've gone and, sniped parts off of junk equipment out in dump yards, to rebuild something on the Dustless Blaster so we could finish the job, right? A lot of the other paper blasters, they're a very sophisticated piece of equipment. I think they're overly sophisticated, to be honest with you, and especially for somebody that doesn't know how to rebuild that type of equipment. It's just a great tool. It's a great invention.
That's really awesome. It's great to hear that this is such a powerful tool, but even though it does need to be maintained, it's not intimidating or intricate machine that will scare you away from doing your own maintenance or replacing parts on it yourself.
Absolutely. And so I also asked Mike, what was one of the biggest changes for his business besides what we already talked about with the media and the cleanup, but what was a big change for him when he started, really going dustless on a regular basis? And so here's what he had to say.
I just can't even, there's so many things that Dustless Blasting has contributed to our family and our business over the last 7-8 years. And I mean, for one, just the cleanup and, the purchasing of sand can be huge, but in most places, you go hog wild with a blaster and you're going to have some person that thinks there should be no industrial development, no industrial work. I've had it happen when I was down in the Puget Sound, down in the Seattle area. We were ballasting Washington State Ferry. People see fugitive dust. You got kayakers undertaking pictures, sending it to the state capitol, to the EEC. And that's happened to me up in Alaska. Well, when we got the Dustless Blaster, and we contained because we had to, because the weather was always crap. There's no way you'd paint without it.
Right.
All those calls stopped. We've not had an environmental complaint since we started our business.
That is so cool.
And Dustless Blasting came in to Alaska Marine Coatings within the first year. Secondly, in a day and age, when the pandemic first started, we got our paperwork as an essential service provider for oil and gas right off the bat. It was very difficult to get people to work. Everything was closed down in Alaska. We were able to scale back as a husband and wife team and still go out and do barge and tug projects, even though we didn't have an load of employees. If you're a startup that wants to go out and, there's a guy in Homer, Alaska that has a business and all he does is goes and blasts fire hydrants for the city.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah, so you wouldn't do that with dry media.
This has always been one of our main goals, is to support these people in these industries so they can do their work while not disrupting the people around them.
Exactly, and we are super proud to be a contributor to this innovative way of blasting that allows people like Mike to do these important jobs that he loves without dusting out the kayakers nearby.
Yeah, that's right. We asked Mike to walk us through one of his favorite projects, so let's see what he has to say.
I did a tug last year. I think I sent you the pictures of it. That tug was part of the Crowley Maritime Mosquito Fleet. So that project, for it being a 30-year-old tug that was built in 1974, that had spent its entire life on the Arctic slope, it was fun to do and transform that.
Right. No, that's awesome. How long did it take you?
Oh, it took about 2-3 weeks because it was, it was the old coal tar coating. It was like an oil coating, and that's another benefit to dustless blasting because a lot of times with the additive, you're taking away a lot of the surface contaminants. If you've ever seen coal tar, it's literally, you could smell it when you're blasting it. It doesn't blast easy. And it's really hard to get the contaminants out of the substrate before you coat.
Right.
So it was really, it was Doc's full work, got a 35-year-old tug. It was never intended to live this long. When they built that mosquito fleet down in Sacramento, those tugs were intended to be like Bic lighters when they were starting to go crazy drilling on the North Slope. So that was an exciting project.
We love hearing about all the projects that Mike was able to tackle with the Dustless Blaster.
And y'all, Mike had so much awesome advice for you guys that there's no way we could fit it into one episode. He shared advice. We haven't even touched on him blasting in Alaska, freezing conditions. So that's going to be on the next show, but also he really harped on just knowing the lingo, knowing surface preparation industry standards. If you're going to get into these commercial and industrial jobs, he went over all the things, the basic language that you need to understand when bidding these big time jobs. So this will all be on future episodes to come.
Yeah, next episode is going to be all about blasting in freezing conditions. And with Mike's expertise, we're going to hear all about what it's like to blast in the winters in Alaska where you can sometimes hit negative digits.
And a huge shout out to Mike from Alaska Marine Coatings, who sat down to be interviewed and just who is so willing to share all of this awesome information with you fellow blasters.
If you have any questions about this episode, leave them in the comments section down below or visit dustlessblasting.com.
We'll see you next time.